All right, Aaron. Thanks for coming on the show.
Oh, of course. I'm glad to be here. Thank you for having me.
Uh, I met you at the Faith and Culture Writers Conference years ago at Warner
Yeah.
Pacific. Yeah,
Yeah, that was the first time. Yeah, it was.
yeah, and have been following you on Twitter and on your blog for years since then, and really excited to we've interacted on Twitter, but this is our
Mhm.
first conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah. This podcast, it has been fun because it's like, oh man, I finally get to talk to people that I've known for years or I haven't seen for years.
Yeah. That's always good. The podcast I host, I get to talk to some incredible people
Mhm.
that I've interacted with, but never really gotten to spend some quality time with. So it's been fantastic. I can only imagine how it is for you.
Yes. Before we dig into the theme of your podcast, the types of conversations that you're having, can you share your background with listeners?
Of course. So I live in Oregon now, but I grew up in Utah for the first 28 years of my life. I grew up as a Christian, which is different because Utah is a primarily LDS culture society. Um, the LDS church really drives a lot of aspects of society. So I grew up in this little kind of evangelical bubble of people that knew each other and that were sort of banding together. Um, I've gone to a wide variety of churches. Finally, when I was out of high school, I landed in EV Free Church, an evangelical free church, and I started volunteering there. And I started doing youth talks, like doing the lessons. I started preaching. I started developing curriculum. I started leading music. I was doing all sorts of stuff.
Mm.
And the the whole time I was undiagnosed bipolar 2.
Mm.
So I had a lot of other stuff going on as well. Um, I would have days when I couldn't get out of bed. I would have my journal entries are all over the place from like, oh God, I'm such a worm. Why don't you love me? To it's so great to be so close to you, God, and to love you. And all of this was actually my mood swings as
Mm.
opposed to actual like the, I'm not discounting the events reality to me, but the truth is they were mood swings, not fantastic and depressing episodes of
Uh,
like time with God. You know what I
that
mean?
that characterized your the actual quality of your relationship with God.
Right.
It was your
Exactly.
it was your biochemistry, your
Yeah.
neurochemistry that was affecting your experience
Exactly.
with God.
Exactly. So I ended up moving from that church to a different church. Um, kind of had some hurts and some pains in that transition.
Mm.
The other church, I was doing the same thing, same type of stuff, still undiagnosed.
Mm.
After sort of a similar cycle in that church of really giving my all and then kind of needing to step away, but nobody really like coming after me,
Ah,
kind of just letting
okay.
me go, so to speak.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. Let,
after that,
let me
oh
slow
yeah,
you down there because that's uh that uh it you worked really hard. You were like doing so much, and you were struggling with like a mental illness that's like one of the harder ones to deal with. It's not just anxiety or depression, but like bipolar too. Um, was some of the misunderstanding or the hurt from the way people were like treating you because of what you were struggling with?
to be honest, nobody said anything about my moods or about erratic behavior
Hmm.
or about anything that they saw.
Okay.
So nobody clued me in that maybe I needed to go see a therapist. Nobody clued me in that maybe I needed to talk to my doctor. They just kind of ignored it or chalked it up to that's just how Aaron is.
Okay.
So the hurts that happened were really about people that I cared about giving me an experience of neglect when I needed care and comfort.
Oh. Okay.
That's the best way I can put it. They kind of, as soon as I stopped serving in church and kind of took a step back for my own health, for my own well-being, nobody called me to check on me. Nobody was like, hey, let's grab coffee. Nobody did any of that stuff. And so it made me feel unwanted.
Yes.
You know, it made me feel like I could do a lot of things for people, but as soon as I wasn't doing something, I was unwanted. So that was this sort of cycle that was happening in both of these churches. After my second church, I moved with my wife up to Oregon. We weren't married at the time. Excuse me, sorry. We weren't married at the time, but we moved up to Oregon together. And she wanted me to go see a therapist before we got married. We were all set to get married. She said, you need to go see a therapist. And I did. I found a counselor. And there was a lot of brain fog that I had about my 20s and about experiences. So she would ask me some diagnostic questions. You know, it was the DSM-4 at the time, I believe. This was back in 2008. She asked me some diagnostic questions, and I would be like, I don't know. I can't tell you. I don't know. So she actually pulled up the diagnostic manual and read the symptoms right out of it and said, have you experienced this? Have you experienced this? Have you experienced this? You know, a mania more than a week? Have you experienced psychosis, which I haven't? Have you experienced major depression lasting for 3 months or more? Have you? And I was like, yes, 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 and yes. And she's like, you have bipolar 2. For your listeners, bipolar comes in 2 forms. One is bipolar 2, which I have, and one is bipolar 1. The difference, my understanding anyways, is the difference is bipolar 1 can lead to psychosis and mania. You swing up really high and you kind of lose touch with reality a little bit. Grandiose visions of yourself.
It's more extreme and a little more unsafe. More risky behavior. And
yeah. So I have bipolar 2, and it took me a long time to get that under control. Working with med providers, because I also have a diagnosis of an anxiety disorder, GAD, generalized anxiety disorder. So that is sort of a comorbidity that exists, and getting both of those, because they feed off of each other. You know, my depression feeds into my anxiety energy feeds into my mania, and it's just this big circle of not good.
Yes, you constantly have to like stay on top of it. And manage it.
So I've been stable for about 2-3 years now. No major episodes. I've had minor episodes. I will always have minor episodes because we experience mood swings as humans. I just experience them a little more intensely. But I've been stable for a while, which I'm really thankful for. My wife is a huge help. She makes sure that I take my pills when I come home at night so I don't forget, which is really important because that's my antipsychotic that I take. And without that one, I get a little whoopy, I guess is the best way to put it. But I ended up actually finding recently an Anglican church that I'm at, and I have not thrown myself into serving. The pastor ended up talking me into preaching a couple times, and I did lead a book study, but I'm not all in gung ho. What can I do there every day at the church doing stuff? And people like seeing me. We're friends on Facebook. They check in on me. When I went to church last week in person, they were like, "Oh, it's so good to see you. You know, I wish I could give you a hug."
Mm,
You know, things like that. And so I feel very welcomed and wanted right now at a spiritual home.
that's
Um,
wonderful.
it
Yeah.
is, it is,
Yeah.
and I continue on with my therapy, dealing with hurts from my past, dealing with um, old traumas that I have from my childhood. Um, the biggest one being, just laying it out there, my mom died when I was 2.5. So
Mm,
I had an extreme loss when I was a kid, and that has shaped a lot of things.
mm, mm,
But I'm in therapy. I'm in a good church home. I have 2 beautiful children, an amazing wife, and living life to the fullest that I can.
mm. Yes. The, in therapy lately, Aaron,
Mhm.
what are you learning about yourself, or what's helping with in therapy
Um,
lately?
we're working on my resistance to grief journaling.
Oh,
I have some grief that
you're a writer, but you have
I am.
resistance to grief journaling.
I have a resistance to grief journaling,
Okay.
which, because it's hard and it's uncomfortable feelings, and it's things that hurt to admit that are true.
Mm,
We sort of develop frameworks for how we cope with things. We develop stories that we tell ourselves, and then when that story has to change, oftentimes there's a grief that goes with that, because we see that the story we told ourselves to protect ourselves, to be kind to ourselves, is now, I wouldn't say harming us, but is now holding us back.
mm,
And that's very difficult for me to sit with and to really tap into those emotions, because I've hid them for so long. And there's a certain amount of excuse me, there's a certain amount of fear that I have of going there as well, because of my bipolar. I don't want to trigger a depressive episode,
mm,
um, which I have a great therapist, and he's going to guide me and talk to me. And I have a great med provider as well, that I can call and touch base with. We've adjusted meds here and there a little bit, as necessary.
mhm,
So it's not just stagnant of like, well, you're on something good, let's stay. But sometimes I go up on propranolol, which is for my anxiety, depending on what's going on in life. So I feel confident that I'm in a safe place,
mm.
but it's just really hard
But
work.
it's still gonna be hard. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah. The uh that that work, it's so feeling safe is so important. I'm glad that you highlighted that. um
Yeah.
and sometimes having a team of providers, and having people check in on you, like friends, even if it's not about mental health, but just how you're
Yeah.
doing personally, it is um can help you get ready to go through hard things. Like
Yeah.
some people, when they call the office, the counseling office, or when they start meeting with, that they'll share that, like, oh, my friends have been telling me this, or my pastor's been telling me to go to therapy for like a couple years. And then the time is right. Sometimes you have
Yeah.
to like find the right time to 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 tackle
Yeah.
tackle.
You have to be in a place to want to do the work. You can't just be like, I'm here because somebody told me I needed to go. You're not going to be open and receptive to what you need to do. You might be thinking more like, well, somebody's going to fix me. That's not how therapy works. It's not, I don't sit down and get fixed for an hour. I sit down and talk and bring things up, and I do the work of repairing my own breaches, so to speak, but I have support and I have help and I have guidance on how to do that work. So
Yeah. The so with the the journaling, you mentioned grief journaling. You write a lot about mental health and anxiety and depression, and how the connection between emotional health and spiritual health. So can you share a little bit about your writing and
sure.
what that journey has been?
Yeah. I've always been a writer ever since I was a kid. My Twitter profile is a picture of me when I'm 8 years old, sitting at a typewriter, typing away. I've always been a writer. I've always loved stories. I've always loved. I've really grown into writing personal narrative essays, sort of the self-revelatory. This is what I'm thinking. This is what is going on inside me. Let's explore it. And I started writing about my mental health as a way to process it, as a way to understand myself and to understand what this thing is. I found myself writing about just being honest about depression, about hard days, about what that looks like. I found myself writing about suicidal ideation, about self-harm, which were both part of my story. I found myself writing about anxiety. I found myself also writing about the resistance to get better, how you learn a comfortable way of living and you're kind of resistant to change that, even though it's going to make you healthier in the long run. So I wrote about some of that stuff, and I've just kind of kept writing about it for, well, I was on Twitter in 2007, and I had my blog then. So it's been since 2007 that I've tried to write some of this stuff.
15 years of writing. Yeah.
Wow.
Are you gonna compile it and make it a book?
I did that one time. The publisher that I was with ended up going under, so it went out of print. I have other book aspirations that I'd like to write first before just compiling my stories. I probably will at some point. I think they're worth it. I think they're valuable. They're truth telling, and that's what people have always told me, is that you don't shy away from the hard things. You tell us the truth, and people need to hear this because churches don't always handle mental health the best, and because sometimes they fear going to therapy because it's a spiritual problem, not an emotional, biochemical, neurological problem. And I just wrote about my journey to understanding what my mental illness is and how my spiritual health and my emotional health are tied together. And it's not one or the other, it's both and.
Yes.
And that's what I continue to write about, that and reflections on the Anglican liturgy, because I find it fascinating. But even then, I ended up writing about one of the first sermons I preached at this little Anglican church. I was like, in the middle of the sermon, I'm like, I deal with bipolar, and here's how this is relevant. So it's part of my story, and it will always be part of my story, and I will always share it in big and small ways.
Yes.
Yeah.
there have been some of your essays in the last year and a half that they're just really powerful because like you said they're real about
Thank you.
the experience. um Aaron, you mentioned the connection between spiritual health and emotional health.
Yeah.
What would you say to a listener who struggles with their faith or um their spiritual health or life because of the suffering, because of what they're going through with emotional um mental illness?
Yeah. Um, I would say the first step is self-compassion. Be kind to yourself.
Hmm.
You have to learn to do that if you want to do any of this work. You have to be able to say to yourself, you know what, this is hard, and that's okay.
Hmm.
Why don't you eat a cookie and take a break for a while? Like,
Hmm.
you have to be able to talk gently to yourself, especially if you're dealing with depression and anxiety, because we have these tapes that run through our heads.
Hmm.
I call them my depression tapes because when they turn on, they make me depressed. And they're those nagging voices in my head about I'm not good enough, about my self-worth, nagging voices about you'd be better off. Um, you're failing, you're better off without you, nagging voices, nobody cares. All these really difficult things to hear. Like all of my core fears being yelled at me.
Hmm.
I have to treat that with compassion. I can't strong arm my way through it and just sort of white knuckle and be like, no, this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true. I have to say, there's a reason. And after that, after the attempts of self-compassion, I want people to know that we are one being.
Hmm.
We're not divided up physically and emotionally and spiritually and mentally. Our spinal system is connected to our vascular circulatory system. Our emotions are connected to our spirituality. They're also connected to our physical body. It's all interconnected.
Hmm.
So somebody that's really struggling spiritually and struggling with mental health, I would say use as many resources as you can. Use a pastor that supports you going to therapy so you can also use a therapist. And you can glean from them and you can learn from them. They can help you navigate some of these things and give you a toolbox that you didn't already have. Because those tools are how we do the work. And maybe you need to go see a doctor as well, not just for medication, but for physical health, because you take care of your body and your emotions are going to be less unhinged because your body feels better and can handle. When I get anxious, I feel it in my body. And when I haven't been taking care of my body and I've been eating like crap and just kind of sitting around, I feel it so much more intensely. And it's hard to identify it so that I can work through it. Like, it's hard for me to say it's in my face, it's in my neck. It's hard for me to say it's in my chest because it just feels so uncomfortable everywhere. But when I take care of my body, I can identify it and say, this is where it sits. Why is it sitting here?
Hmm.
What message is this emotion telling me? And the emotions are there to tell us messages.
Yes.
So listen to your body. Your body is trying to tell you things, and it's worth it to listen to it.
Yeah, that's so good. The uh, some folks, their emotional health starts to affect their physical health. And like you mentioned, like the playing out in your body, and then some folks, it's their their emotional health is fine until they have some health challenge, that our physical health is affected, and then that starts. That's kind of like when anxiety or depression like enter into their life, into their story. But then it's just a vicious cycle. So taking care of your emotional health can lead to physically feeling better, but sometimes taking care of yourself and your physical health is part of the solution too. Have you had any challenges with your health that have been affected by your bipolar or your anxiety?
Um, I have chronic lower back pain,
Mm.
and when it gets really bad, the depression tends to get really loud because I feel incapable, and that's one of those core fears that I'm not capable. Look at you, you can't even walk right now because your back's so hurting. And so I don't have it the same way other people do. Other people, I'm not here to play the suffering Olympics, but the truth is, other people have a different, harder time with that stuff. Um, but I still feel it. And when I do experience a depressive episode, my body, I have, what's the word I'm thinking of? I have psychosomatic symptoms.
Mm.
I'll start feeling my skin starts tingling and things like that. Sometimes it'll hurt to like move, and I'm achy, and my back's irritated even more. And
Mhm.
so again, it's all interrelated, and I can also tell what I need to do by the way my body reacts. If my body's reacting this badly, maybe I just need to go take a nap.
Yeah.
And that's part of my health routine.
Yeah. Part of your self-care is just napping or resting when you need to. Yeah. All right, Aaron. So let's shift to talking a little bit more about Christian spirituality of being human, and
Yeah.
and how you how you have gotten interested in studying that in depth.
Yeah. I wanted to find some terms, first of all, because it can just sound like religious gobbledygook to say a Christian spirituality of being human.
Mhm.
But what I mean by that is a Christian spirituality that is based upon Jesus and based upon his teachings. But the end result of the practice of that spirituality is to be more fully human, more fully present, more fully embodied in our faith. It's something that's developed interest over the years, over a long time, from back in my 20s, specifically around the Anglican liturgy, and the idea of a sacramental worldview. A sacramental worldview is a worldview that's based upon the idea that God shows us invisible grace through physical means. One example of that is the sacrament of Eucharist, of communion. We believe that it's an outward sign of an invisible grace that we are receiving from God.
Mhm.
So it's a very tangible physical thing. It's not just a memorial. It's not just something of remembering that Jesus died for me. It's something of saying God's grace is coming to me through the bread and the wine. And it's a mystical thing. We don't claim to understand it. But that idea of a worldview that sees the grace of God coming to me in these physical ways, that makes me really curious as far as, should my response be a spiritual response or should it be a physical response? And again, I believe that we are one, as I mentioned. So sometimes those responses are the same, but it should lead me to act as a good human, as a fully alive human, as a kind and compassionate human. And if it's not doing that, I have to question the fruits of my spirituality, of my theology, of my practice, because I want to be someone who gives God's grace to other people. That's kind of the idea of a Christian spirituality being human. As far as with, excuse me, I have a frog in my throat today. Jeez. As far as where it intersects with my mental health, practicing mindfulness has been a huge aspect of a spiritual practice of mine and an emotional mental health practice of mine, because being fully present in the moment is the only way that you can be present for someone else and be that grace for them, sort of deliver God's grace to them. If I'm scattered and all over the place and I'm not being present and being mindful of what's going on, it's easy for me to steamroll over people. It's easy for me to ignore people. It's easy for me to not hear what someone needs and just hear how I can react. So the practice of mindfulness, the practice of also radical acceptance that this is the reality that I live in. And if this is the reality, then now what do? I can't live in a pretend land, in a pretend story. I have to live in the real story. So those type of things, a lot of it centers around DBT, to be honest. It's become kind of a spiritual practice and an emotional practice at the same time for me. Like I'll sit down and I'll pray my prayer beads, and I use that time for mindfulness of my mind drifts and wanders and I bring it back, or I just watch the thoughts drift on by using a big sky technique that I learned, just imagining they're clouds and examining them non-judgmentally.
Just observing them.
Yeah, just observing.
Just watching them.
Yeah, just watching them. Learning how to tap into a wise mind, and believing that is where the Spirit speaks the most clearly to me, or I guess where I can hear the Spirit speak the most clearly to me, because I'm not running off of my amygdala and my reflexive actions, and I'm not getting caught up in my cognitive world, but I have a nice balance. So those type of things, a lot of it of what and even this grief journaling is becoming a spiritual practice for me. I might be resistant to it, but at the same time, I know it's good for me to do it. And it's a way for me to connect with God and to receive God's grace. Even as it helps me unpack, reshape, and grieve emotional wounds.
Yeah. The I like how you describe that, because I think some folks that have that struggle with emotional health feel like disqualified or like second class citizens in terms of like spirituality,
Yeah.
or Christianity, and it's almost like, oh, if I don't have anxiety or depression, then that means I'm doing the Christian life and the Christian walk right, and or doing church, church life, um uh and then if I'm struggling with anxiety or depression, then like, yeah, it's there's something not just wrong in terms of circumstances or how I'm managing my emotions, but there's something wrong with my faith or my relationship with God.
People start inserting reasons that they're not qualified to be loved by God because they're experiencing anxiety and depression, which feed into the mentality that I'm not lovable. So when God enters into the picture, we start saying I'm not lovable by God, when the truth is God loves. And that self-compassion piece that we're learning is actually us taking the voice of God and saying it to ourselves. It's people that have mental illness, I would argue, are more qualified to serve in a church, or more qualified to they're more qualified to talk about the Christian life because they've sat in their own suffering and they understand that God does the same. If you're experiencing everything good and well in your life, and then something happens and suffering happens, we have these a multitude of reactions. One reaction can be, why did God's favor leave me? One reaction can be, well, this sucks. It's just something that happened. One reaction can be, I must have done something bad. But when somebody who lives with suffering enters into that picture, and they've done work, spiritual and emotional work on this, and are learning self-compassion, because we never become a master at it. We learn it. They can come in and help people navigate the reality of life. It's a Buddhist concept, but it is true, I think. Life is suffering. We suffer in life because all sorts of reasons. But it's true. We live in this broken world and we suffer.
Yeah, that's part of the Christian worldview, too.
Yeah, it is.
Yeah, as you were talking, Aaron, the is it Second Corinthians passage about comforting others with the comfort that we've received from God came to mind.
Yeah.
But something new that came to mind is that Jesus did that. So we have a Savior who came and was human and experienced human suffering and the dirt and the mess and the brokenness of this world. And so when we do that, when we're reflecting who Jesus is to others, even as we deal with our neurochemistry being imperfect, or physical ailments, or like something I'm feeling lately is just getting older, the limitations and the grief of getting older, and body breaking down. It's that is part of the human experience, being human.
It is. Yeah. And Jesus experienced that. I mean, one thing that really comforts me, I on my podcast, I asked Jonathan Puddle, who's a fantastic guest, and he's a fantastic person. But I asked him one time, I said, did Jesus experience trauma? And we had this conversation around the idea that Jesus did experience trauma. He lost his father, Joseph. at some point. He lost his good friend Lazarus.
Hmm.
He experienced these death things. He was rejected by his own hometown. Disciples, that crowds that acclaimed him, turned on him, and he experienced all sorts of emotional trauma. So he knows what it's like and will sit with us in our emotional trauma.
Hmm.
And so when I get a chance to sit with someone in their pain, not to try to fix it, not to try and give them a cliche answer, but just to sit down and say, man, this sucks. And I'm here with you. They get a taste of the God who does that. And it puts some flesh and bone on an invisible God, because I'm there with them. And the only reason that I can sit with them is because I know suffering. You know, I don't want to overplay my mental illness as like it's so bad, it's so this, it's so that. But the truth is, it's hard. It's
Yeah.
difficult to live with, you know?
Yeah. I don't think you're overplaying it, Aaron. And you know, I've seen how you've struggled at times. You know, I've witnessed that.
Yeah, I'm pretty open on Twitter.
It's been painful. It's been painful. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Jesus experienced trauma. I think like the Apostle Paul, I really think he struggled with anxiety, maybe PTSD.
Yeah.
Because if you think about like the times that he writes about like almost getting killed and like with storms, but also like people trying to kill him, and you know, when he talks about like a thorn in the flesh that he's asked God to remove, I think it was like PTSD. The way the sarcasm and the way he writes, it definitely sounds like someone with anxiety, like the all or like some all or nothing stuff there. Some extreme ways that he communicates. Lots of people who are really smart like struggle with anxiety, I think, because like what I've noticed, at least the folks that come to see me, and maybe it's Portland culture, and being on the counseling center, being on the campus of a grad school, but it there's definitely folks, and I would include you as one, but our writing friends, is people who think deeply about stuff.
Yeah.
They struggle emotionally. Like it's like it's like a normal response to abnormal events, right? It's
right.
Like if you're not distracting yourself with video games and Netflix, it's stressful. If you read the news, it's just like what we're all going through.
It is.
And like to your point again, like a lot of being human is suffering. But let's but sitting with people, being with people, telling your stories, story is helpful. Is there anything else that's that you're finding hopeful or helpful here at the start of the year? In your life personally, or in general?
I'm finding it helpful to learn how to see things from my wife's perspective. My wife is the person that's closest to me. I mean, we live together, obviously. We have kids. We've been through a lot of stuff. But I have a tendency to get really short-sighted in my views and wrapped up in my experience. And so it's helpful for me to get out of my head and get her perspective, because it helps me see, one, where I can act as a better human for her, but two, because it also helps me be more expansive in my thinking. It's not easy. is difficult, but I think it's good work. That alongside the grief journaling are like my two big things right now, like learning to see my wife's perspective and journaling through some grief that I had. And they're kind of interrelated because the grief makes me really short-sighted because I don't want to experience it. So I try and close myself off and protect myself from it. But in doing so, I shut myself off from my wife's perspective. Yeah.
Yes. Being self-protective or protecting ourselves from feeling grief also protects us from feeling other emotions.
It does.
It's hard to just turn everything off. It's like you said, we're whole. It's all connected.
Yeah. It is.
If your wife was with us, what would she say about living with you? What's something that she's learned being your spouse, being your wife?
She's learned that she's not the only one who's very honest, especially about like mental health and trauma and things like that. She has her own story, her own things. But I have mine, and she's very supportive of me talking about it. She's I don't know how to answer that question fully because things have been a little rocky lately. And so my mind immediately goes to those rocky places.
I see.
And I'm really trying to take a step back. And I think she's very thankful that I provide for her. We're a single income family. I try and work the best I can. I'm an assistant manager at a restaurant. It takes a lot. She's supportive of it. She needs to be. She takes care of the kids. But I provide for her, and I think she's very grateful for that. And I'm learning how to provide for her emotionally and mentally as well as physically. And it's an ongoing process because we as people evolve. You don't master taking care of someone. You learn tools to use in different situations. You know what I mean? Like, yeah. I think a lot of times people think with spouse relationships, apparently, especially, that they're going to figure it all out and everything will be golden from that point forward. But the truth is we evolve as people. I evolve, she evolves. Sometimes it's in sync, sometimes it's not in sync. And that's nobody's fault. It just is what it is. And since we change as people, we learn the tools, but then learning to apply the tools is the real challenge, how we keep using them well. And I think it goes back to that self-compassion piece of I'm compassionate with myself so I can be compassionate with her and see that point of view of hers. But it's difficult because it's hard for me to be compassionate to myself sometimes. Again, it's all interrelated. You know what I mean? It's my spirituality, my parenting, my spousing. It's all interrelated because I'm trying to be a whole and complete integrated human.
Yeah. The you're saying something deeply true about marriage. So I love it. I do marriage counseling. So
yeah.
You're saying something profoundly true that we evolve, but we're different. We're different people. So when with those changes, what we need and how we need to care for each other and the support we need changes. And so that can be a hard transition that can create some of the rockiness because it's like, wait, I finally figured out like how to be a good husband, and then now you're changing the deal on me, or I
Yeah.
as your husband am changing. And then it's like you have to kind of work at like, wait, do I like this new version of you?
Yeah.
you know, and that happens a lot with, like, sometimes when folks go to therapy. I I I I I wrote a joke about people changing when they go to therapy, and
Mhm.
then like their friends liking the old version of them better. But there's some
Yeah.
truth to it, because um it's uh it's unsettling. Like,
Yeah.
we know what we know, and we get comfortable with what we know. And then um when you start deconstructing your emotional and relational habits, the way you communicate, the way you react emotionally, it's like, wait, this is like a new person living with
Yeah.
me. And so
Yeah.
uh but but talking about it and just being open and honest is kind of the way forward, um
Yeah.
to stay heading in the same direction. um the so anything else to add about uh what you're learning about the Christian spirituality of being human? I know you're fleshing that out on
Yeah.
your podcast. um
Yeah, yeah, we talk a lot about embodying faith and what that looks like, and in chronic pain, in therapy, in pastoring, in life. And for me, the part that I'm learning the most is that God wants to like me.
mm,
Not just that God does like me, but that He wants to.
mm.
Um, that might seem simple, but for me, it's really revolutionary.
Yeah, man,
You know?
just you say that like makes me happy. That idea,
Yeah,
that I'm gonna have to sit with it. I'm gonna have to chew on that one for a while.
yeah,
That he wants like me. And the whole thing of like embodied faith. um I half of the week I'm a health coach, so I'm helping people eat healthier and exercise
mhm,
and lose weight. But there's so many people that experience shame, and feel unloved for the way they look.
yeah,
And I think part of embodied faith is this idea that God wants to like us. God likes
yeah.
us regardless of our weight and the number on the scale. Like,
Yeah. And He
um,
wants to like us no matter what the weight is, no matter what your appearance is, no matter what
mm,
your emotional health is,
mm,
no matter what your spiritual health is, no matter what. Like he's not waiting for you to fix things before He's like, yeah, I like you. I like this new version of you. He's just like, I like you.
yeah,
Let's keep going because I like you.
yeah. So some people, they avoid getting out of their house because they don't like the way they look.
Yeah.
And I love that. Like, God's not waiting for you to be a certain way or look a certain way to to want you,
Yeah.
to have a relationship with you. And we have to do a better job um of treating people with compassion and acceptance,
Yeah.
of
We need to be
regardless
the
of
ones
how
that
they
go
look.
over to their house. They're not going to come out. I'm not going to expect them to. I'm just going to go over to their house
Mm,
and I'm going to play some cards with them and I'm going to hang out and I'm going to let them know that I like them. I like being around them.
mm,
Things like that. That's the Christian spirituality of being human. God likes me, God likes you. So let's celebrate that together because I'm learning to love like Jesus loves. And you're learning to love like Jesus loves. So we can love each other that way. in physical, tangible, embodied ways. You know what I mean? I've often been a big proponent of taking care of people with mental health. And I don't just mean like getting them to therapy. And I mean, like, if somebody's in a depressive episode, cook them dinner. Go over and watch a movie with them. If somebody's feeling really anxious, go for a walk. Get them out of the house, get them out of their head a little bit. Go see a movie. I know it's a bit different in a pandemic time, but there's still things we can do.
Yes. Yeah.
And we need to take care of each other, because that's the only way that we get out of this.
Yes. That I thank you, Aaron. Like I want more of that. I am like, I've known this, but I'm really want to make some changes this year to connect with people in real life more. I spend way too much time on screens, doing phone and video appointments for work, and then I get on my phone or computer and just interact with people more virtually again. And so, yes, hanging out, enjoying time with each other physically in person when Omicron variant allows us to, as much as possible. It's something to keep in mind. That
it is.
Yeah. So, wow, it's been really neat to talk with you today. And yeah, I knew that our conversation would go like this, because you're just so honest and open about things. As we wind things down for today, what's next for you? You're busy with work.
I am busy with work. I'm working on a spiritual practice of writing a reflection on the Anglican lectionary readings, the scripture readings for the week. I'm working on a spiritual practice of writing a reflection on one for every week. So I'm going to keep doing that. I've got my podcast. I'm setting up an interview with 3 really cool people, and we're going to talk about emotions and actions. So I'm really looking forward to that. I'm going to try and treat myself to a writing retreat in April, the very 1st of April.
Oh, is that with our friend Mark Shelsky?
Yeah.
His retreat?
With Mark. Yeah, his retreat.
Oh, fun. Yes.
Yeah.
I'm hoping Mark will come on the podcast this year to talk about his his journaling book that he's working on.
I'm sure he would. I mean, he's a fantastic guy. I love Mark so much.
Yeah, he's so cool.
Yeah, that's what's next. And then working through my grief journaling and working through seeing my perspective for my wife. I'm working on a book. I'm not really talking about it right now because it's in a baby stage, but I hope to have that done by June, July. I'm being really compassionate with myself, because I have a tendency to go all or nothing, and then I write myself into these corners, and it's not what it needs to be. So I'm really just taking it slow and easy. There's no pressure.
You're not doing 3 months. You're gonna take 6 months.
I might even take longer. I don't know. Yeah. I'm letting it come as it comes. Yes. I'm sitting down to do the work, but I'm also not forcing it and saying I need to write 1,000 words today. What am I going to write? I'm just kind of like, I'm going to sit and I'm going to think for this hour. That's my work for today. And I think that's, for me in this book, I think that's healthy.
Yeah. Nice.
Yeah.
All of that sounds like a good 2022.
Yeah.
How do people listen to your podcast and read your writing, Aaron?
Well, you can go to CulturalSavage.com And I have blog posts for my writing and for my podcast. If you want, you can also search your favorite podcast player: Spotify, iTunes, Google Podcasts, Stitcher, all of them, for Cultural Savage, and it's got all my episodes there. I'm on Twitter and Facebook and Instagram as Cultural Savage. Pretty much just search Cultural Savage. And
You are a cultural savage. Yes. Yeah. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thank you.